Welcome back to the Black and White Bistro, the espresso of black and white photography. I'm your host, DavidLPayne, and you're with episode 22, part 2 of our conversation with Spencer Pullen. Enjoy. You had a photo, it looks like you shot it out of a book or a dictionary?
Yep. I took my mother's college dictionary and I was thumbing through it. It's now the dictionaries back then were more like this thick.
Yeah.
It probably weighs a good 10 pounds, but I mean, it was a thick dictionary when she got it. So I thought, well, let me see. I was paging through and I thought, well, maybe I can do something with this. I said, well, why don't I use the word photography or photographer or something like that in there? I found that section and I thought, well, let me put some reading glasses down next to it, like somebody was reading it and then they had to go take a break. So then I positioned the camera for the composition that I wanted. And then it got a little interesting. I'm like, how can I light this so it's just not a plain shot? I wanted to try to add some drama to it.
Yeah.
So what I ended up doing for that shot is I took now the flash again was off camera. It was on a light stand and I put it in what's called a snoot. So instead of a box, the end of the flash is like coming out like a little tube that looks like this. And that is to make the light really hone in on a certain area. So I found that that was not um, directional enough. So I ended up taking some cardstock and some painter's tape, and I started cutting out little pieces of this cardstock that I used the painter's tape to tape to the snoot, and I was able to get the light to go where I wanted it to on this book. So that way it just kind of gave it some mood and drama rather than just, oh look, it's a pair of glasses on an open book. So again, I've used light to basically just craft the image that way.
So it was kind of like, those very expensive flashlights, but you can twist the rim around the light to make it from broad to a focused
Right.
light beam, same concept.
Right. And you can make your own flags or gobos as they're called by using all you need is some cardstock and some painter's tape. Again, you don't need to spend a lot of money.
Simple. Well, that leads us into question 4. Your black and white images are often built with remarkable use of light surrounded by very deep shadows. How do you accomplish that in your photo?
So for the studio work, I basically use light has a depth of field. I don't think as photographers, we really don't talk that much about it. We talk about depth of field with lenses, but light also
Yeah.
has a depth of field that's, I believe, tied into the inverse square law. We won't pull that out today because I want people to actually like this video. There's a lot of math involved,
Thank you. Thank you.
but but yeah, so basically, if you want to make something more moody and not have the light spread as much, then just move your light closer. Or like we were talking about with the snoot, or try different modifiers. And somebody once told me if you want to make your image more interesting, don't light all of it. So that's something to kind of keep in mind if you're trying to craft an image. Now, if I'm more doing landscapes, since I live in Southwest Florida, our mountains are our clouds. It's a little flat here in Florida. There's not
Yeah.
a mountain to be seen anywhere. So we get these big, beautiful clouds in summertime. So when I'm looking at a scene, I try to vision it finished in my head. So by using a tool like Nick Silver Effects, I generally use like a red filter to really help just push the black sky home to give it some punch. But while I'm out in the field, what I'll do is I'll take a circular polarizer and put it on the camera, and then I will polarize the sky on purpose to give the clouds lots of definition. If you've never tried something like that and you got those big puffy clouds, if you use the polarizer, it makes all that detail in those huge clouds come out, and it will darken the blue part, which can then help you when you get into a piece of software, what's Camera Raw or whatever people want to use to edit their images. It just kind of gives you a starting point to go that way for black and white.
Wow. When I'm shooting black and white digital with my Q2 monochrome, I always keep an orange filter on the camera to try to promote contrasts and a little bit more stark separation. Same concept, right?
Exact same concept. Yep. Well, yeah, when I had my 8x10 film camera, I would a lot of times screw a red filter onto it, like Ansel and Clyde did. That's how they got a lot of the detail into their images too. We're just doing it digitally now. As far if anybody has, if they want to try black and white and they don't want to invest in all the filters, then that's what I would do. Is I would shoot it with a circular polarizer at the minimum. Then you can also get into long exposure, which adds a whole nother dimensionality to black and white photography and get a 3, 6, 10, or even a 15 stop filter. But yeah, try a circular polarizer. That may help for those that have just a plain digital camera.
Outstanding. Okay,
Don't buy
folks,
a big
another great
filter. Don't
tip.
buy a five. Yeah, and don't buy a $5 filter either. You don't want to have a nice lens and then put a $5 filter in the front that doesn't work very good.
Yeah. Uh, Been there, done that. I learned myself, like, uh, for my Q2 monochrome and for my new black and white film effort, uh, I've used B&H filters
Yeah,
from Germany. And yeah, they cost a little bit more, but the difference they make is exceptional. You get
absolutely,
what you pay for.
absolutely.
Okay, more great tips for you black and white photographers out there. With that, let's take one more break and we're going to view Spencer's third guest selected artist photo, hear him talk about it, and then we'll come back for our final question.
I think as photographers, as of all the images that we shoot, we may only have a handful of what I like to call diamonds. Those are the ones that just every time you look at them, they just take your breath away and just make you sit there and still look at them, even though you may have shot it yesterday or maybe you shot it 10 years ago. This one of this Model T Ford is one of my, what I consider my diamonds. I was at the right place at the right time. There is no Photoshop with this. So I used a wide angle lens, a 12 millimeter, I think it was a 12 to 24 millimeter lens, cameras on a tripod. Now to photograph this, because it's in this garage, lighting was kind of a tricky one to work with. On camera left, I had the main door open and there was a small window to camera right and the side of the garage. The truck itself was black, so it's going to just absorb a lot of light, and there was lots of shadows. So, thinking about how to combat this, I actually took bracketed set and I fused them together. It's not HDR. I use exposure fusion. That's one of my tools that I like to use. If any of you are using Lightroom, you may be familiar with LR and Fuse. That's kind of one of the another one product that they make. So I like this process simply because it gives you what your eyes saw when you were there, unlike HDR, and give you kind of some of that strange artifacts that can go on. A little side note about this image is I was teaching photography class at one of the local colleges, and I showed this image, and one of my students broke down crying. So the first thing is I asked her, "I'm sorry, did I offend you?" And she said, "No." She said, "That was my father's car, and they donated it to this particular place. And they had tried and tried to get a photograph, but they could not get anything." So she was just amazed of this particular image. So I asked him how many siblings there were in the family. And she told me it was like 4 or 5. So what I did is I went home and I actually printed multiple 16 by 20 prints and gave them to the family so they have something to remember their father by. So it just goes to show you, you just never know where your photography is going to go or who it's going to impact. And ultimately, that's what we want to do with our photography is to move people. So I was very honored I was able to help this family's legacy live on.
Wow. I hope you folks watching are learning as much from Spencer as I am. This is incredible. Which leads us to our final question. I'll give you a hint. Those of you who want to try black and white, get out your notepad because here come the tips. With that, Spencer, you spend a lot of time actually instructing both individuals and groups in black and white photography and how to use light. Could you share your top 2 or 3 challenges that you see photographers facing, and how do you suggest they overcome those challenges?
Sure. One of the biggest ones I hear, especially in a group setting, is they'll say, well, this doesn't look good in color. I'll just convert it to black and white.
Eee!
Sometimes that might work, but what I try to tell them is go out and photograph with intent for black and white. In the beginning, it kind of takes you a while to train your eyes to see in black and white. So you have your black and white goggles on, but not everything just because it was a bad color photo is going to convert to black and white. A lot of folks don't realize, like, for example, white and yellow will basically process the same. So if you're using a color heavy object, it may not convert well and save the photo. So I would suggest that maybe people go out and they have intent to shoot for black and white. Try whatever it is people are into, whether it's I've done landscape photography. I've even gone to our local rookery and shot some bird photography, all black and white. That's why I focus like on egrets, birds that are white,
Yeah,
just so I get
beautiful
the
work.
contrast. Yeah. So if you think ahead, you can really get creative on how to make things work for black and white.
No, that sounds great.
Yeah. So that's definitely one of the challenges that I hear a lot about. And the other one is people will look at a black and white photo when they're kind of getting started and they go, it's missing something. And that's a cue to me to tell them
Yeah.
contrast, contrast, contrast. Do not be afraid of the contrast slider. Same thing with a white and black slider. Move it, move them in. If you're, because you need that punch in black and white. It's called black and white, not 40,000 shades of gray. We want some black and mostly black and white. It should have all the spectrum in there of black and white. So I tell folks, even with color images, and I catch myself doing this after I've worked on some. I go, "You just isn't jumping out of the off the page for me. What is going on?" And then I'll go back to the contrast slider and I'll move it some. And I'll go, "Ooh." And then if I move it more, it goes, and I go, "Oh, wow, okay." Then I knew that's what it was missing was the contrast. But don't forget the other sliders as well.
Being a black and white photographer, I'm really comfortable with the concept of contrast. But for a lot of our viewers who are color shooters, how do you define contrast simply?
I would say the different tones from light to dark. So one of my mottos is look for the light and don't fear the shadows. So if I'm looking, for example, if I was a street photographer, I would, to me, noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon is the best time for black and white photography because I want that hard light. It's going to
Yeah.
create shape and depth and texture, all that great stuff that we're looking for in black and white photography.
Well said. Wow. Yeah, as a black and white photographer myself, you always hear, "Oh, shoot in the early morning, shoot in the late afternoon." And if you're shooting black and white, high noon on a sunny day is glorious. You can shoot a traffic cone sitting on a black asphalt street with incredible contrast, hard shadows, tremendous highlights. Yeah, I like that. What was it? Shoot for the light and don't be afraid of the
Yeah,
shadows?
look for the light and don't be afraid of the shadows. Crank it. I know everybody when they're coming from the color world, they say, "Oh, I've got to." make sure I don't clip anything, or, if I look at the back of the LCD and I've clipped some of it, as long as it's not like person's face or something like that,
Yeah.
then great, it's fine. Like you said, the traffic cone, if the stripe that's around the traffic cone is blinking, you know what? I'm going for hard contrast. That's what's going to give it that pop. If I want to get more texture in an image, depending upon what it is, I'll actually take this would be a great one for the speed light, is to put it almost perpendicular, or I should say parallel to the subject. So when the light's skipping over the top, that's how you can get some great texture off the object, whether it's a brick, stone, something like that. It'll actually create that texture that's hard to get any other way. All you gotta do is skip the light across it.
One thing, I do my post work, I'm like you, I said goodbye to Adobe, about a year and a half ago. Enough's enough. I do my work in Capture One. And one of the tools that I use a lot is levels. They've got a tool, sliders called levels, where you can adjust the mid-level to influence or improve the mid-tone contrast. Am I doing that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, you wanna balance out the majority of the grays, but again, on the each end, you've got your white and black, so don't be afraid to move those in a little bit, if which basically what you're doing is you're helping creating contrast. A lot of people will take, like, the curves dialog box, and they'll put the infamous S curve in, so you're
Yeah.
gonna bump your highlights a little bit and drag down your shadows a little bit, and that'll help you get some contrast.
Yeah.
But if you do have a specialized piece of software like Nick, or if you're using Camera Raw, something like that, where you have control of the individual colors, the red, green, yellow, blue, cyan, and violet, move those back and forth and see how it alters your image. When I'm working, whether it's a landscape image or if I'm doing my macro photography, that's one thing, is you want to obviously I shoot a raw color file. So that way the software can read the color, and I've got the most amount of control to move those individual colors and actually do, if you want to call it, micro contrast with each color.
Yeah.
And it's you don't have to have a degree in to figure this out. You just take the slider, move it one side or the other, and do you like the effect? Fine. If you don't, push it the other way. Maybe that's the way it needs to go.
Okay. Any other great tips you can help with?
One other one that I use, if your monitor or your camera allows you to do this, is to change your viewfinder to monochrome. So, for example, I've got an Nikon Z6, so I have it set up to shoot a raw file, but I'm using the monochrome preset. So when I look through the viewfinder, it's actually showing me black and white image. So when I go out, I'm not just shooting a bunch of images. And then I get home and I go, oh, geez, is this going to work? I've got an idea of the ones when I was out in the field, or if I'm working in my studio, that's going to work
Yeah.
in black and white. So I'm not wasting my time. And that's a real easy way that somebody could put on their black and white glasses, is to look through their viewfinder if it has that capability.
Boy, if I could find someone that made black and white glasses, that would be great. Unfortunately, they're not out there. You raise a very important point, and it's a question that I've got. You talk about seeing in black and white or putting on your black and white glasses. You see a lot of people talking about seeing in black and white, but Spencer, to you, what does that mean? How would one of our viewers want to try to learn to see in black and white? What are they looking for?
I would look for light versus shadow. I would look for textures. Um, for landscape photography, I would try to look for big puffy clouds if you have those in your area. The other thing, like I mentioned before, if you want to kind of add more oomph to your black and white photography, is think about maybe long exposure. It requires some neutral density filters. That would be another tool that we could use. But basically, when I'm out there, well, let's say I'm out in the field doing landscape photography, I'm kind of checking the weather. Now, sometimes if I've got a blank sky and maybe I got a dark tree or something, I'll purposely overexpose the image so the sky is more white. And then I got the black tree. Again, it's the white versus black. We're going back to contrast.
Huh? Wow, that makes a ton of sense. Well, Spencer, I got to tell you, this has been educational, to say the least. And I hope to our viewers out there watching this, you may have picked up one or two or a dozen great tips on how to improve or start with your black and white photography. Spencer, thank you so much for your experience and your sharing. And we really enjoy having you on the show today.
I appreciate it. It's been fun.
For our viewers, if you want to see more of Spencer's work, you can check it out on his website or in his Vero profile. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, the black and white bistro, the espresso of black and white photography. Have a great day.